Hello. Well, welcome to another edition of Inside America's Minds. Today I have with me Scott Prendergast. Scott is a full-time mental health inspirational speaker and advocate. You have a platform, Scott, Minding Your Mind, Navigating Life Through the Lens of Hope. The Lens of Hope is your podcast. Is that correct?
Yes, I have a podcast called The
It's great. The Lens of Hope. I love it. And of course, I love the fact that you're an advocate for the field of mental health, behavioral health. I love the fact that your platform focuses in on reducing the stigma surrounding mental health, especially when there's been so many people experiencing mental health, also known as behavioral health today, crises with the pandemic, with the whole political landscape of the country, and just the financial duress for so many during these difficult of days. So you're a graduate of Temple University, and that's in Philly, right? Philly, Pennsylvania. Okay, and your major was in public relations, but you specialized in public speaking. You are an excellent I am not, see that? You are an excellent public speaker. So Inside America's Minds is about everyday people like you and me with extraordinary experiences. And your life experiences in particular are extraordinary, which is why it's such a privilege to have you as a guest on the show. So I want to start with, Scott, if I may, how did you become a mental health advocate and inspirational speaker?
Yeah, of course. Well, of course, first things first, thank you for having me on the show, Jody. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And to kind of dive into where this all began for me, it started in college. Well, really, let's take it back to high school. So in high school, in the early part of college, I struggled with depression. It was always there. It was always kind of a thorn in my side, but I didn't pay much attention to it. However, as I got deeper into college, it became a serious problem for me. Until the point where I got to a state in my life where it completely consumed everything and every aspect of me. I could barely get out of bed in the mornings. I couldn't think about anything besides the sadness and being in this dark pit in my life. But I came to a point where I said, okay, you know what? I need to do something about this. I need to do something to try to pull myself out of this dark place. So I started to write. I would write all the time, even in class when I wasn't supposed to. I would just be writing all the time about the things that I was feeling. And over time, I said, you know what? I know I'm not the only person to feel this way before. I know there are other people out there feeling like this. So I started to write for this website, and where I would write about college students going through depression and what the everyday life is like. And it got a lot of traction. And ultimately, an organization called Minding Your Mind, a nonprofit, found out about me, and I started to work with them. And their mission is to really lessen the stigma surrounding mental health.
So that's Minding Your Mind. I'm sorry to interrupt. Minding Your Mind. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, correct. That's the name of the organization. They contract me out. And then in addition to them, I also have my own brand, which is called Scotty P Inspiration. And that's where I have my podcast called Navigating Life Through the Lens of Hope. And I just work on, a little bit of a broader audience as opposed to only students. But with Scotty P Inspiration, it's everybody, all people in this world. And so ultimately, my goal with these programs and what I do and the speaking that I do is I want to validate other people's feelings. I want to let them know that what they went through is real. It's okay to talk about it. And most importantly, you can move forward past those difficult times in life. And together, through addressing it, we can move past those mental obstacles that hold you and I back from whatever it is that we're desiring in our lives. So that's kind of a little bit about my story and where I've been and what I'm doing.
So I want to take us back. When was the first memory, the first realization you had, at what age, when, if you can even remember where, that something was not right? Something was not right, and it was depression. When was that, Scott?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jody. And I think if I want to go all the way back, this is really going back. When I was in preschool, I remember preschool and kindergarten, I used to get so upset to the point where I felt like I was almost going to throw up every day before I would go to school because I was afraid to leave my mom. And I didn't want to go and, be out of my normal comfort zone. And that was that first kind of sign of anxiety that I had in my life. And it was constant, but I never really put a name to it. And as I got older, that constant anxiety was always there. And as we know, when your body's under that constant stress response, it can lead to depression. And I think the first sign for me with depression was when I was in high school. I remember getting to the point where I just didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to do my schoolwork. I didn't want to hang out with friends. I didn't even want to work. I didn't want to get out of bed or do anything at all.
How
Everything.
does that feel though? You're describing it, but how it's so hard to quantify, Scott, because it's emotion, and emotion is difficult to quantify and make tangible. But because there's so many people that experience depression, can you take a moment and describe that darkness, that feeling, not getting out of bed, but can you go beyond that a little bit?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, Jody. And I think the feelings kind of can be equated to this. It feels as if you've slipped through this unknown crack in the earth and nobody knows it's there and nobody will ever find it. And you're constantly there and you can see everything going on, but you can't partake in it. That's a little bit how it felt like with me. And it feels like that the weight of your world is not only the weight of the world is not on your shoulders, but it's in your stomach and it's a pit. And it just feels like you want to partake in these different things. You want to have a normal life. You want to be happy. You want to do this. You want to do that. But it feels like there's this constant tug on the inside of you, reminding that you can't do it because of this or because of that. And that's really what it felt like with me in that dark place in depression.
How was it socially? How did it affect you socially when personally you were so encapsulated in that abyss of depression?
Yeah, that's another fantastic question. And for me, it was a constant struggle because I wanted to be social. I was like, Scott, go up and talk to those people. Scott, go up and talk to that girl,
Mm.
whatever it is. And I wanted to do these things more than anything. But something was constantly holding me back, that depression on the inside. And then that led to me self-loathing myself. And I would say,
Okay.
Scott, what's wrong with you? Why can't you go talk to those people? Why aren't you getting up and going to the prom? Why aren't you doing this or doing that? And I would beat myself up and become my own biggest critic, which in turn would lead to me, falling back into that negative self-talk more, which would in turn lead to me even more isolating myself.
Okay.
And so it was very difficult socially for sure.
Now, is there any family history of depression or anxiety, Scott?
I'm not really sure. I have I think so, but it's not
Okay.
something that has ever really been brought up.
Okay.
But I would definitely say I could see it for sure. But
Okay.
I don't know clinically if there's anything actually there or not. But if I had to guess, I would say for sure there definitely is.
So from even preschool, you remember having this emotional uncomfortableness. And then middle school, now today, well, it has been for decades, middle school is a war zone for a lot of kids that I work with. But how was it for you? Because that is, we know stereotypes start as young as 3. But middle school, oh my gosh, is when the cliques just seem to flourish. How was middle school for you?
Yeah, middle school was a difficult time, trying to find out who I was, where I fit in. And when I was in middle school and high school, basketball, the sport of basketball was everything to me. And I
Huh.
kind of attached my self-worth to that sport. And that's
Okay.
what I took all my pain, all my anger, all my fear. I just took it and I put it towards that. And I kind of buried myself in the sport. And I put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak, thinking that basketball was going to be the key to all my answers. And for middle school, for me, it was just, I didn't want to hang out with people that much. I didn't really do anything besides play this sport because that was my escape. But
Okay.
ultimately, the problem was is that when I got into ninth grade, the end of middle school, early of high school, I actually got cut from my team. And so
Oh
then,
my, I got to stop you there. What was that like? Oh my
right,
God.
right. It was crazy because I felt like my self-worth had been taken away because I had
Yeah.
convinced myself that basketball was all that I had. And now that that was gone, I was like, well, goodness, I really can't do anything right. I really don't have anything.
Hmm.
And that's where that depression started to really kick in after that.
Okay. Yeah, that I mean that's a psychological amputation. I mean, it's especially because you've got a foundation of questioning your self-worth and then something you love so much you're passionate about and then that is no longer there. So, you you know, one of the things that you mention is that you focus on overcoming everyday obstacles that hold us back in life, which I think is important. And you also work within the health and fitness industry, which I want to get to a little bit later. So this happens in the ninth grade. You're cut from the team. That probably was the limited socialization that you had and was your passion. What happens next? I have to ask because most individuals would have started to self-medicate.
Right. And that's a great point. I get that question a lot. And for me, thankfully, I was raised up in an environment where I knew from a very young age that medication, whether self-medicating was not a route I wanted to go. I knew that, hey, you know what? Things are tough right now. I'm not happy, but I know that's only going to make my life worse. So I was aware of that. But
Okay.
instead, what my kind of addiction became was picking myself apart from every angle. Every time I
Hmm.
tried something, I would say, Scott, you're worthless, you're pathetic, you don't matter, you can't do anything right. And I would compare myself to everyone else and say, look what they have, look what they're doing. And I would look at myself and say, you're worthless, Scott, because you're this, you're this, you're this. And it's almost as if I would make lists and telling myself all the reasons why I was nothing. And that became kind of my addiction, really, as strange as it sounds.
No, no, because I mean, the emotions are housed in the limbic portion of the brain, the emotional part of the brain, and that's where addictions are housed as well, we could say. And so it's every time you wrote down a reason why you weren't good or why you couldn't excel, it was reinforcing that negative belief system that you were in. It's kind of like people are addicted to worrying. They worry about worrying. And there's so many different neurochemicals that are administered from the brain throughout the body when we're stressed, when we're anxious, the cortisol, the adrenaline, and the brain gets used to it and it becomes a baseline of how we navigate life. So it sounds like you were there. You were there. And now we have to hear, how did you get out of it? Do you remember the moment, that turning point, when you made the decision to step outside of that box?
Yeah, I think for me, the real big turning point was my junior year in college. So for multiple years, I was back and forth. I was in that dark place. I'd come out of it for like a week or two, a
Mm.
couple of weeks, depending upon if something good happened, and then I would fall back in it. But then junior year of college, I remember I came to a point where I was watching this TV show, and this pastor, TD Jakes, was on the show, and he said something very simple. I don't know exactly remember what it was, but he was saying how it's a decision that we make every day with our mindset. And I was like, man, you know what? I want to work on that. And I realized that depression isn't always a decision. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain sometimes, and
Mhm.
we can't always control that. But I realized what I can control is how I react to this depression. I can put in the work, I can put in the effort to try my very best to do everything that I can in my control to pull myself out of this. And what I started to do is that every time I had a negative thought, and we're talking, this was multiple times a minute, I would stop myself. I'd say, no, I'm not letting this negative thought in. I'm going to let it pass on through. It's going. And then I'm going to replace that with a positive one. So here's an example I always use. I remember I got a bad test grade on a test once or multiple times. And I would say to myself before anything else, Scott, you are so stupid. And you can see how that little negative thought, that plants a seed, right? And then all throughout the day, I was telling myself, you're so stupid. You'll never graduate. You'll never get a job. You'll never get married. You'll never be happy, so on and so forth. But then I would stop myself and I figured, okay, let me change this up. And if I got that bad test grade, I would then say, no, I'm not stupid. I just need to learn the material in a different way. I need to adjust my approach and I need to work on it in a way that's better fitted for me. And that type of process is what I
Hmm.
really started to do, changing my own self-talk and changing my kind of lens that I was looking at things through. And over time, because as we know, this takes a lot of practice and resilience, I started to see that mindset change. And when I woke up in the morning, I wasn't saying, Scott, your life is worthless. I was saying, no, Scott, you have reasons to get up today, and they're this, and they're this. And I was just filling my mind with these positive things. Even if I didn't believe it, I was just trying everything I could. And ultimately, I started to see that change happen, in junior year and the senior year, and then once I graduated.
Well, and it sounds like the implementation of my modality, my primary modality is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, because it's all about recognizing triggers and understanding the emotions that turn into these thoughts that are sometimes distorted and how they affect decisions and behaviors. And I did notice that you also implement, and this was on your website, a practical approach of mindful strategies combined with compassion to help others validate their own feelings and work towards moving past the challenges in life. And that's what cognitive behavioral therapy is about as well. So it's about, well, I want to hear it from you. So talk to when you give your seminars and your workshops, how do you present to people how to get started with that, identifying the negative thoughts and then working towards conditioning and repatterning the brain for positive thoughts?
Absolutely. And it's such a process, as you know. And for
Mm,
me, the interesting thing is that I Googled this stuff initially. I somehow found out about CBT and I was like, whoa, I can do this. I can do this right now on my own. And that's really how I started to get into it.
great.
So one of the things that I did and I do when I'm speaking to people is I say, okay, throughout the day, I want you to, take some time to reflect. 5 minutes, 3 different times a day, or maybe even just 2 minutes, 3 different times a day, a couple of minutes. And I want you to write down what thoughts have been dominating your mind throughout that day. What thoughts are they, what thoughts and feelings? So maybe anger, maybe feeling inferior, maybe feeling worthless, whatever they are.
Mm,
Write them down 3 different times throughout the day. Do that for a couple of days, and then you'll start to see that pattern. And what's happening here is we're becoming aware now, like, okay, you know what? I've been thinking a lot about how I'm worthless because of,
mm,
so-and-so outperforming me in my job, whatever it is, right? So what I do is I let people know, like, hey, we have to recognize this first. We can't just let whatever comes in our head just take over and just run with it, right? We've got to
right.
see these things. And by writing it down, now the next time that we think that thought, we're going to say, wait a minute, I wrote this down before. I'm recognizing this. And that's kind of that first step. And then after that, as we know, of course, it's a process, but it's about kind of, implementing, changing that self-talk. And that's one of the big things. I love positive self-talk. I think it is so huge. It's so simple, but it is so important. And what I always tell people is like, hey, you've got to change what you're saying right there. Now, if you're saying, hey, my life doesn't matter, and you're saying it's because this, and this, we say, no, my life does matter. Here's why. And we're finding 3 reasons that we're pulling from our experiences to kind of, provide that evidence for with ourselves. Because as we know, with our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are all connected. We got to start at that thought. So if we put in good thoughts, we're not letting that feeling get to, worthlessness, inferiority, and then our actions aren't going to follow it. So I always talk about catching those thoughts at the first sight. And one of the best ways to
Okay.
do that is to write it down.
Yeah. What I recommend is that my people keep a worry jar too, so they can have that extra cue. Like if that negative thought or if that worry, if it's ruminating or perseverating on the same thought or worry, they can write it down, put it in the jar, or throw a bean or a button or whatever they want in it. And that seems to help. What do you recommend, Scott, if somebody has a lot of stressors going on, like we just went through this pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs, financially they're in duress, a lot of relationships were in jeopardy, health, people were dying. But so there was an increase, and there still is, because we're still not out of it, but there's been an increase in mental health vulnerability throughout the world, but we're just going to focus in on America. So what do you recommend when the environmental stressors kick in and they start machine gunning you? What do
Yeah.
you recommend at that point? That's a question I get a lot. How do you
Of course.
stop it?
Yeah, and that's a question I always hear all the time too. And I think the
Mm,
answer depends on, first off, the willingness of the person. But this is a little term that I came up with that I
okay.
think I always tell people. It's called emergency joys. So it's essentially a
Ooh,
positive coping skill, but it's a little bit more fun than that.
say it again. E-
Emergency joys.
Emergency joys. I love that. Wow.
And so essentially all it is that when you find yourself being overwhelmed throughout the day with maybe losing a job, losing a loved one, a variety of whatever the things are, and they're just like you said, machine gunning at you. An emergency joy is kind of like a little pocket of peace that you can
Mm,
step into for 5 minutes or so. That's just going to allow you to forget about everything that's going on and just be in your space, kind of like being
I love
mindful.
it.
But what
Emergency joys, a pocket of peace. I love
yeah,
it. Great.
yeah.
Go ahead.
And so that's something I came up with. I'm trying to get the trademark on it. So
You need
hopefully
to
we
get
can.
the trademark on it. I mean, it's brilliant. People
Yeah.
need that. We need that hope. We need those little things that are so monumental. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
exactly. And that's the thing with emergency joys is they can be so simple. And I always share what mine were. You know what mine was? Or I had three really big emergency joys during those really deep parts of my depression where I needed it. The first one was watching Seinfeld, the TV show,
Yeah.
every day. That was my first one. The second one was listening to my favorite music. I had this playlist. I would listen to it. And the third one was so simple. It was just eating my favorite breakfast every morning. That's it.
I
It was
love
literally
it.
right? It's so simple. But those three emergency joys gave me that pocket of peace to either start my day or within the day to give me a break from that machine gunning stuff of the outside world coming at me. And really kind of refreshed me and said, okay, after I was done with my emergency joy, I'm ready to attack this life again. I'm ready to get back into the world because I feel refreshed. And that's why it's so important, I think.
Well, and I think at the time, I mean, when you're rewarding, but you're also comforting yourself with these emergency joys, is that you're increasing the serotonin. And you're actually decreasing that cortisol and adrenaline and stress. So it's working. Oh, that is so brilliant. And talk about it more. I love it. I love it.
I'm glad to hear someone from the clinical world too approves of it. That's awesome. That makes me happy. Yeah, but one of the reasons I came up with the term is kind of like this. You know, when you're going through life sometimes and you're really in a dark place, you need something that's kind of like that last resort that's not going to fail anytime when it's that emergency time. And some joys are good on some occasions, but other times they can't get it done for you. Well, I think we all have those couple core things in our lives that every time we turn to it, we have a little hope. It brings us a little smile and it puts a little bit of light into our lives. And they do it every single time, no matter what. And that's where I came up with that term emergency joys, because it's an emergency and you need some type of joy to be brought into your life at that time that's going to pull you out no matter how difficult things are. And I learned from experience, and also something that I kind of applied through what I've learned too, in other ways.
Well, Scott, you also talk about the darkest moments in your life, the depression. What was was there one cardinal event, the darkest thoughts and feelings that is most reminiscent or the turning point?
Yeah, I think for me, when I was in college, that really, really darkest moment was just where I got to a point where I was saying every single day, like, I hate who you are, Scott. I hate who you are, Scott. I hate who you are.
Mm,
And I was just saying it every day when I looked in the mirror. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, if I keep saying this, I don't know where my life's going to go, because if I don't like who I am, how can I like anyone else? How can I be good to anyone else? How can I have any joy whatsoever? It starts with that self-confidence. So I need to work on that. And I got to a point where I said, okay, you know what? Saying this to myself, being stuck in this dark place, it's not helping me and it's not going to help anybody else. And I don't know how to get out of it, but I've got to try. And for me, that's that self-loathing of myself
mm.
over time got me to the point where I said, this is the darkest moment. I can't keep doing this. I need to make a change. And that's when I started to do so.
Were they scary times for you like they are for a lot of people? Did you have thoughts of not wanting to live anymore, or how did that go?
Yeah, so I would definitely say, I'll be honest, I had some suicide ideation. I never had a thought out plan. I never seriously considered taking my life. No. But I did have ideation. Of course, of course, of course.
Mhm.
But I always knew, in the deepest, deepest part of my soul, I always knew, hey, you know what? Things won't always be like this. And I had that hope on the inside. Even on my darkest day, when I remember kneeling on my floor, just crying for hours, I
Mm.
still had that hope that it will not be like this forever. Something on the inside telling me that. And a big part of that was my faith, which is something that's big for me. And I just knew that, hey, it will change eventually. And I think for me, that's what kept me going forward during those really, really dark times. And thankfully, things did change. So that's what I always try to tell the high school kids too, is because
Yeah,
going through those tough times, it's not always that event that's going on in your life that is the problem. It's that interpretation of the event. And as we know, when you're those high school kids, your
yeah.
prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet, right? So maybe I don't get asked to the prom seems like the end of the world. So that's something I always try to let the younger kids know
And
about.
they don't have a sense of control as it is anyhow in high school. And it's all about trying to figure out who you might want to be. What do you tell them to encourage them to get
Yeah.
through those moments, Scott?
Of course. Well, one of the things that I always tell people is that, look, there's always all kinds of pressures and all kinds of, persuading to be this or to be that in high school. But what you really need to find out is look to the things in your life that you're passionate about. Look to the things in your life that really make you happy and bring you some joy. And start kind of navigating more towards those things to find out who you are, what you want to be, and what you want to do with your life. Because how are you ever going to be happy if you're trying to do something, you hate it, but everyone says it's cool? You're not going to be happy. You might like the feeling of being quote unquote cool, but you're not
Mhm.
truly going to be happy. And that's going to crumble apart years down the line. So I always tell people, hey, look, even if it means you're outcasted for a little bit, even if it means you're not part of the cool crowd, in the long run, finding what you like and what you're passionate about and what makes that fire on the inside of you go, find those things and find friends within that area. Find different opportunities and jobs and internships, whatever it is in that area, because in the long run, that's what's going to make you happy, even as you for the rest of your life, not just for a couple years.
Well, and what do you, in particular, with the school, middle school and high school, even elementary school, um, but what do you find is their biggest challenge psychologically, emotionally?
I would definitely say the constant comparison,
Okay.
just a feeling of inferiority to one another. I think that's what I've found with the people I've talked to. That's one of the biggest things, because somebody will light up with a smile about telling me something, right? But
Mhm.
then this other person will say, "Oh, that's not this or that's not that," and you just see the life get sucked out of the
Sucked
person's
out of
face.
them. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that comparison and social media certainly doesn't help. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of great things about social
Yeah.
media. Amen.
I'm
That's
with
how I built
you.
my brand. But at the same time, that constant
Mm.
comparison, that constant, I have to be this, I have to be that, is draining. It's mentally exhausting. And when we get exhausted, that's when we fall into, susceptible moments where we could turn to addiction, where we could fall into depression, severe anxiety, as you know, whatever it might be. So that's one of the biggest challenges I see.
Bullying. Were you ever bullied because you were different, because you were an isolate?
Yeah, so I wasn't severely bullied, never. I always kind of just kept to myself, and I had my little group of friends. Like any kid, I had times where people said things, this or that. But for me, the biggest thing was this: I kind of bullied myself. That was my
Mhm.
biggest issue, because I always was so different and so outside, and I would get mad and say, "Scott, why are you this way? Why don't you fit in with this world?" And I didn't understand, and nothing I could do could ever get me to fit in. I'm telling you, nothing. And I got to a point eventually where that became my greatest strength. That's why I'm doing this now. But when you're a kid, you don't always see it that way. So for me, it was just that self-bullying, that self-critic that was so incredibly mean. And I think a lot of times that can be the meanest one.
And I see that a lot with especially the gifted and talented, especially the kids that are outside of the mean, the kids that navigate life differently and they're not even aware of how incredible they are. But along with that, at the opposite end of the continuum is that elusive, you know, goal of perfection, which we know, hey, it's a process. There is no perfection. So
Absolutely.
one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because this is your area of expertise, is what are some of the myths about depression? You've lived it, you talk about it. What are some of the stereotypes and myths that we can debunk?
Yeah, so a lot of times people say, depression is something that you can catch from a neighbor or catch from a family member. Like, oh, my mom's depressed, so now I'm depressed. And I understand where people are coming from that, because when you're around somebody who's in that environment, like, it can rub off on you. But as far as actually, quote unquote, catching depression, which is something I have a lot of kids ask me about, that is,
Okay, okay.
not something that that's not how it works. But another big myth that I hear a lot about depression is people will say, oh, when you're depressed, you just get out of it, just deal with it and just move on. It just goes away. But as we know, depression doesn't always just go away, but rather it's something we have to learn how to cope with and kind of
Mhm.
handle and address in a proper way. If we just say, oh, one day it'll go away, it might not, because we're not working on it in a proper way. And that's another myth I have to debunk a lot of times, because some people say, oh, I was depressed for like 2 weeks and now I'm good. And a lot of times I'll say, well, that may not actually have been depression. That may have just been, a passing mood. And that's something
Mhm.
that we want to differentiate, obviously, is because depression is a serious thing. Chemical imbalance in the brain, the symptoms that go along with it are very severe and can lead into other life-threatening things. And if we're just kind of crying wolf and saying, oh, I'm depressed because we had 2 down days, I don't think that's a very good thing that people are doing. So that's another kind of myth that I have to debunk, is that, it doesn't just go away.
Right. And what are some of the symptoms that people can look for, regardless of their age?
Of course. Yeah, a lot of different symptoms. I think I'll just kind of run through some of the ones that I
Okay.
see the most commonly. One that I see a lot in high school kids, and also even people my age, I'm 24, is kind of like the joking, quote unquote, but not really joking. That talking about, I feel like my life is worthless. I feel like I don't want to live anymore. I feel like I don't matter. Anytime that somebody's saying these phrases about hurting themselves or hurting somebody else, we have to take that seriously, because that person is really struggling on the inside. Because why else would they joke about something like that? And I think that's a symptom that isn't brought up much, that we really have
Mm,
to talk about, is that feeling and the outward projection of that feeling of
okay.
worthlessness. So that's one of them. Obviously, we have the stuff such as the drastic change in appetite and sleeping patterns. We see that a lot. And not just, oh, today I ate a ton of food or yesterday I didn't, but prolonged, 3, 4 weeks consistently of that increase in appetite or decrease in appetite, increase of sleeping, decrease in sleeping, things like that. Of course, we always want to pay attention to. And obviously, it's usually drastic. Like I said, it's not just, oh, I got 2 hours less of sleep tonight. It'll be, I slept all day or I haven't slept in days. And one of the other symptoms that I'll bring up real quick, and I think this is a big one that not
Mm,
everybody pays attention to, is the inability to concentrate.
yes.
A lot of times when we hear that, we think,
Yeah.
oh, it's ADHD, or oh, the person's just distracted. Of course, that can happen. But when somebody is depressed, you cannot focus on anything. I remember when I was depressed, I would sit there and be like, okay, I'm going to listen to the professor. I'm going to take notes. And I couldn't do it. I could not do it because all I could focus on was how I was feeling and the thoughts that were tied up inside of me. So I think that inability to concentrate is something that goes over a lot of people's head and we don't think about as a depression symptom, but in fact,
Mhm.
it's actually one of the telltale signs. So I think
Yeah.
that's just one of the, yeah.
Did you have, as one of the symptoms, difficulty getting started and ending tasks, or like even in school with homework or at work, getting to work?
Oh yeah, yeah. So with school, me in school, I was never a big fan of schoolwork my whole life. I always couldn't stand it, but I knew I had to do it just to get to where I wanted to be. But when I was really in that deep part of the depression, I would always, I couldn't finish anything. I would start something and then I'd just be like, ah, what's the point? I don't matter anyways. And something like that would happen. Or I would try to finish a project and just say, ah, what's the use? I can't ever do anything right anyways. And a lot of times when we're seeing things like that, and we want to make sure that we're addressing that too. And it could be a possible sign of depression. That was for me something I saw a lot.
How did your family deal with it? How did your mom and dad deal with it? How did that go down? I mean,
Oh,
it's very difficult for parents, whether they're, parenting together or single. It is very difficult with a child or an adolescent or a young adult, to try and get through that depression, or as a parent to try and understand it. So how did it work with you? And then what do you recommend parents do now?
yeah, my family was one of the biggest reasons why I was able to get through it. My mom and my dad, and my two older sisters, they helped me on every step of the way. They were the people who I could talk to about it. They helped me to work through a lot of my feelings. They
Mm,
were the ones that pulled me through. It wasn't me. It was really my family who helped me a lot. And so one of the things that helped me the most is just them being able to listen to what I was saying. Because I felt like I couldn't talk to friends. I didn't feel comfortable talking to teachers or even counselors.
okay.
But when I talked to my family, I felt like that was an open spot where they weren't going to judge me and they would just listen. And by getting that off my chest, I would immediately feel a little bit better. And so for my family, they were there with me every step of the way. And my family is so close to the point where if I'm not feeling well, no one's feeling well, and vice versa.
Hmm.
So it was really hard on everybody. But because of that, we all grew stronger, which was awesome. And for the second part of your question, as parents, what they can do to help,
Hmm.
one of the things that I think is best is that sometimes parents have a tendency to want to fix everything, right? Like, oh, my
Right.
child,
Yeah.
understood, totally understood. I'm not a parent, but I'm sure I'll be the same way when I get have kids one day. So I think though it's important to remember to make time for allow your kids just to share and say, hey, you know what? This is a sharing moment. Not going to try to fix it. Not going to try to say this or that or why are you doing this or that. Just this is a share. And just create that space where you can allow your child to share what they're feeling, what they're going through without kind of having that judgment or without having that fixer upper hat on either. And I think that's really, really important.
What about though with middle school adolescents, where they're less inclined to share, where it's more difficult for them to open up in general, or if they're not comfortable sharing with their family? I hear a lot from adolescents, I don't want to disappoint them, or they'll get mad. What do you suggest or recommend, Scott?
Yeah, well, for the kids, I would say it's important to make sure that you're finding some type of trusted adult to talk to. Maybe if you don't feel comfortable with your parents, maybe talking to one of your teachers, a counselor, somebody, and getting those feelings out. Because as we know, when you bottle them up and keep them on the inside, that's one of the worst things that we can do. So for the kids, want to make sure you're still finding someone to talk to. Now, for the parents, on the other hand,
Mhm.
I think what's really important is to keep making that effort because kids, they're smarter than we think sometimes. If you keep continually making an effort and showing, instead of telling, but actually showing that you care and that you're there for them, eventually they're going to reciprocate. You may get the door slammed in your face 10 times, but I can tell you this, that child is secretly appreciative that you were trying to help them. that you care, that you're showing that you care. And I think the problem we have sometimes, and understood, is that the parents, they get frustrated and say,
Mhm.
well, my kid won't open up, they won't talk to me. And then they get mad, and it turns into two people just kind of butting heads. Where
Mhm.
I think it's really important as a parent to continue to make those efforts and to show, hey, you know what? You may not want to hear from me, but I'm going to show you I'm here. I'm showing you that I care. And over time, I think that's going to be the best thing that you can do as a parent.
And what about the person, the kid, the adult that doesn't have anybody? Where do you recommend they reach out, especially when during those dark times when there doesn't seem to be the light? And you mentioned the dark and the light a lot. And I think those are great descriptors of depression and coming out of the depression or falling into it. So, what do you recommend if the individual, because depression is also a very lonely thing when you talk to people, it's a journey within the self with very little insight, excuse me, outside of the self. What do you recommend?
Yeah, there's a couple things that you can do, and I think it depends on the person. But I think if you're someone who doesn't have anybody, the first thing that I would do is to find a way to get those feelings out in any type of way. And it starts with maybe writing, with maybe taking a video of yourself talking about how you're feeling. You know, when you do this, in a way, it almost kind of feels like you're talking to somebody. You're writing a story, and it's like you're going to give it
Mm,
to someone. You're taking a video and you're staring back at it. It almost kind of feels like there's somebody there with you. But the reason I say this is because if we don't get it out of ourselves first, you know, how are we ever going to be comfortable enough to share it to anybody? So we have to work on that self-introspective part first to really get that out in a way that we're comfortable with. And then after that, if you don't have anybody, I think it's important for every student to know that there are still people, every kid to know there are people who care, whether it's one
okay.
of your teachers, one of your professors, maybe a coach. There are people. And sometimes it's up to us, though, to take that first step to reach out to them, to say, hey, I'm struggling. I know maybe we're not super close, but I need someone to talk to, just so that way that you're not staying in that alone place, because it's so difficult when you're there. And I know how hard it is to do. Trust me, I didn't want to talk to people about it at first either. But I think there comes a point in time where we have no choice but to do that.
Mhm.
And we have to if we want to, move past it.
So, your journey, your treatment, what kind of treatment did you receive?
Yeah, so my story's a little bit different. First off, I did a lot of research on my own. Like I said,
Mhm.
cognitive behavioral therapy and other practices I applied to my life just by doing research, by watching
Mhm.
different videos, by reading books on clinicians and stuff. And that really helped me a lot for years. However, when the pandemic started, I guess about a year and a half ago at this point,
Yeah.
for the first time in my life, I started to go see a therapist. And I went
Okay.
for about 6 or 7 months, and I found it helped me tremendously. And I think it's interesting because it shows that everybody's process and journey to recovery is a little bit different.
Yes.
For some,
Yeah.
medication and therapy is necessary. For others, it's just one or the other. For other people, maybe it's an alternative method. But it's
Mhm.
about whatever works best for you and gets you those results that you need to see is what I would recommend. And I think for me, my story kind of gives a little hope that, hey, you can do it a different way if that's what works for you. And I think it's all about trial and error. I always hear people say, "Oh, Scott, I've been going to therapy for 3 months and it's not working," or, "Oh, Scott, I've been on medication for 3 weeks and it's not working." But as we
Mhm.
know, the medication, it takes at least
It
four to
does.
six weeks to start to see
Mhm.
that
Yes.
that change. And psychotherapy also takes some time.
Mhm.
Or maybe you just need to try a different therapist or a different
Mhm.
medication. It's all a trial and error until we find that kind of magic elixir that works for us. And it's a process, but I think it's worth the work that you have to put into it.
So, what did you gain from therapy?
You know what I gained the most? How to ask myself the right questions.
Yeah, okay, I want to know more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like for years, I would always just say, "Oh, why, Scott? Why?" And I would never dive deeper into it. But what I learned through therapy is that, okay, why am I feeling this way? And what's making me feel this way? And what is the real core issue here? And once I learned to ask those right questions to my behaviors, I started to be like, okay, you know what? Now I'm understanding my own mind a little bit more and where
Mhm.
I'm coming from. Whereas before, I wouldn't, everything was so reactive with me. I was never being proactive. I was just like, okay, I messed up here. How do I fix this? Or, oh, this is going on in my life. How do I fix it? Rather than going back to the source and saying, why did I act this way? Why did I say this? Why did I feel that way? And that's what helped therapy really helped me with a lot. Is just asking those right questions throughout my life.
So, did you find it was the combination of taking your feelings versus the evidence or the facts? What were the key elements that put it all together for you to make you stop and question what you were feeling and thinking and then change your behavior. Can you give us a little bit more about that?
Of course, I think a big thing for me was, the evidence that I was providing back to myself was super, super key. If I was, and it goes back to the TFA triangle, thoughts, feelings, actions, right? I was telling myself I was worthless. I would then feel worthless, and then I would stop studying for a test, basic example, something like that. But I worked on really changing that evidence, because I found when I was applying that to my mind, that was really what I was going to, base my life off of, because I'll go by what I see. And if I'm seeing, oh, Scott, you're failing all your classes, or, oh, Scott, you're not getting asked out on any dates, whatever it is, that was going to determine my life. So I found, all right, if I can work on making sure I change that evidence that I'm providing to myself, then I'm really going to be able to be in a happier state, and the state that I want to be in.
So if I were to ask you, Scott, describe yourself in one word, what would that one word be?
Ooh, Jody, that's a great question. In one word, I would say, I don't want to say resilient, because it seems a little mainstream. So I'm trying to think of something a little bit deeper, a little bit more unique. I would say probably either resilient or empathetic. I think that's what
Empathetic?
yeah,
Okay.
empathetic for other people, just because I know what I went through, and my whole life's purpose and journey here is to help other people get through that too. And if I'm not being empathetic, how in the world can I do that? So I really think those two, resiliency and showing empathy, are the two words that drive my life forward, and everything I want to do.
Well, and then we go back to emergency joys
Mhm.
and your pockets of peace. And
Absolutely.
so I definitely want to get to all the things that you're doing, but talk to us about Scott and love, Scott and relationships after coming out of the dark, because one of the first things we know with depression is the lack of self-worth. We don't feel we deserve love, we don't know how to give it, and we don't feel that anyone could ever love us. So Scott and love, what about that?
That's a great.
I see a whole change there, Scotty.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah. So when I was in high school, I wanted to be in a relationship more than anything, but I was way too shy. I was way too caught up in my depression to ever really pursue that. And I didn't start dating until, my first girlfriend. I was 21 years old. That's when
Okay.
things started for me. And then I dated her for a bit. Ultimately, I didn't feel that she was right for me. And then I dated somebody else. Let's see, back in the pandemic, and I broke up with them a few months ago, because again, I didn't feel like they were right for me. So right now I'm single, been single for about, I guess, almost 5 months. And that is a big thing for me. I'm always trying to, make sure I get my validation from myself, not from somebody else. But I find that it's difficult sometimes trying to find that right girl, because, I know what's important to me, and I know what my values are, and I know, the way that I want myself to act. And I feel like, because of what I've been through, when I see somebody else not acting in that type of way, I'm very quick to just kind of be like, okay, nope, like I don't want to go down this road again. I'm not going to be there. So yeah, relationships and Scott is something I'm still trying to work on. I've been trying to that
We
mastery.
all are.
Right, exactly.
So,
So
so pulling out of those relationships when you realize it's not a fit, or if it ends, that those moments in times, those snapshots in time can be monumental, as far as leading us down a trajectory of relationships in the future. So, especially if somebody has a history of depression, that vulnerability, when we dare to fall in love or fall into a relationship, are critical moments. So how do you pull out of it without dropping down into the depression or questioning yourself again, which is what I think most people do in relationships, whether they're single or with a significant other or married?
yeah, that's a great question, because I think you can become so susceptible to falling back into that depression
Mm-hmm.
when you go from being with someone and spending every day with them to all of a sudden being alone. But I found for me, it's actually almost kind of the reverse. If I'm with somebody and I'm not totally happy, and obviously no relationship is perfect, but if I'm seeing some really things that are really bothersome to me, and I'm not with the right person, I find it's easier for me to slip into depression again that way, because then I'm not paying attention to my thoughts, my feelings, what's going on. All I'm focusing
Okay.
on is all the negatives about the relationship. So it's a little bit
Okay.
reversed for me. So I'd
Okay.
rather.
Say that again though, because I need to better comprehend that.
Yeah, of course. So for me, when I'm in a relationship, and if I know it's not right for me,
Hmm.
and if the person's not giving me the things I need or showing me the things that I really value, for me, I find myself it's easier to fall back into that depression because I'm no longer being aware of my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, the evidence in my head. I'm not being aware of that because I'm so consumed by this person's not right for me, or I've got to try to change this to make this person right for me. I got to do something different so they like me more. And I become so consumed with that that I'm no
Hmm.
longer paying attention to my own mental health. And then that's when I can just boom, slip back into that depression
Good
again.
point.
And that's scary for me. So that's why I'd rather, leave that relationship because I know I've been alone a lot in my life. I can deal with that. I can manage that. I can handle that. And I'm also able to then pay attention to my mental health, making sure I'm in a good state rather than, having it just be covered if I'm in a relationship.
So what you're saying is that if certain behaviors or certain things from the other person in the relationship triggers you to where you're questioning yourself, then it's time for you to examine whether it is a good fit or not.
Exactly, 100%.
Good,
And
good. That is really profound. I like that a lot. So I have another question, a little bit off the topic, but what I get a lot is people who are, the online dating,
mhm.
or that dance and rhythm of trying to get a rhythm of meeting that person, and then they're ghosted, they're benched, or iced, or whatever, and dealing with that rejection. What do you say about that, and what do you recommend?
Absolutely. And let me first off by telling you, I'm in that world right now because,
Okay.
for a while I was, after I broke up with my last girlfriend, I wanted to be single for a bit because I just felt emotionally drained. But now, I'm back on that whole, like that, doing that dance, right? And
Yeah.
it's tough because you get to know someone, you think, oh, you get excited, and then they're gone,
Boom.
ghost,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And that rejection is really tough. But I think what I always say to people is you have to remember this. Are we going to give somebody else the power in their hands to have to whether we feel validated or not? Or does that validation come from within, come from us, come from what we tell ourselves? Because if we're allowing somebody else to hold the validation for us, people can take that away whenever they please, right? So if I'm saying I'm not valid unless I go on 3 dates this week, that means my validation's purely coming from somebody else.
Good
And that's a
point.
slippery slope to go down. And I think what I always talk to people about is saying, hey, look, we've got to work on finding that validation, being secure with ourselves before we get into that space where we're ready to date. Because then if we're relying solely on somebody else for our joy, our happiness, validation, as I said, that's tough because then if they leave and they take that away, now we're left with absolutely nothing. Almost in a similar way to how I felt when I got cut from the basketball team, right? Different
Mm.
circumstance, but that same type of feeling.
Which trigger? The past triggers the future. And at any time, the past, we can experience it in the present, whether we realize it or not.
Mhm.
So, what would you say to people if there were three things to say to people doing the online dating? What would you say to buffer them? What should the mantra be, especially when people are ghosted or just don't respond or
Yeah,
show up?
it's a great question. And, I got to make a note of that to myself too. So I'd say for three things, though, not in any particular order. Number one, take it slow. Because I think if we try, sometimes what I've seen myself and other people have done to me is, everybody's lonely. We live in a lonely world, especially those who are single. We get that. But if you try to jump in too fast to something, what's going to happen is ultimately it's probably going to break things apart too quickly. And it's probably going to get to a point where somebody is not comfortable with that level yet. And then it's going to lead to breaking off. And then when it breaks off, we're again left with that nothing feeling. So I would say start by taking it slow. Number two, for the online dating, I would probably say, you know, search for somebody who, or not search for somebody who, make sure that you're having that validation in yourself first. Don't search for somebody to complete you. I think that's a common
Mhm.
misconception. Oh, I'm looking for someone to complete me. I don't look at it that way. I think you're looking at someone to be an addition to you and you an addition to them
I like
rather.
that. In addition to you.
Right. Because think
Okay.
about it. If I'm going through the online dating saying, I need someone to complete me, then that's implying that I'm a broken person, that I don't have myself together, that I'm requiring somebody else and everything that they have to make me whole and to validate me. And that's not what we wanted. We don't want to be going down that line. We don't want to be, thinking that way. But
Mhm.
if we're looking at it as, oh, I'm an addition to them and they're an addition to me, now we have two people who are their own people, who are separate, who are great, coming together to create something even bigger. But if they do break apart, they're still both their own people, rather than trying to be like, oh, I need to take that piece away from you back. I
Mhm.
need to take that piece away from you back. And so I think that's the second thing, is look for someone as an addition rather than a completion. And one more thing, I would just say, don't take it so personally. I think a lot of times on online dating, not everybody has, unfortunately, the same motives. And sometimes people can get upset if someone's ghosted or this or that. But at the end of the day, we don't know what's going on in their life. They may be just on a break from the relationship. They may be looking for,
Mhm.
just somebody to talk to. They may be, not on the same page as we are. So I think sometimes we have to remember it's not always our fault if something happens, if we get ghosted, but rather it's just, it's just playing the game sometimes. And if we could go into it with that lightheartedness, knowing, hey, I'm not going to take it personally, we're going to probably be better at finding the right match for us.
Wonderful. And I have to say, this is where I have to say my belief is emotion has no chronological age, because
Mhm.
what I've been privileged to see is with my clients, my patients, is that regardless of age, whether they're 10, 16, 20, 40, 50, 80, that need to be loved and give love is so paramount, and falling in love or having a new relationship is the same excitement regardless of the age. So what you've just told us applies to all ages. And then the other thing is, I just want to get your take on, is it okay for people not to be in a relationship?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up, Jody. I think it 100% is. I
Mhm.
see this a lot of times, especially with some of the girls that I have for friends. And both my sisters now, they're in very serious actually, one's married, the other one's in a very serious relationship. So, but I remember used to hear this from them too when we were younger. A lot of times people feel like if they don't have that significant other,
Mhm.
that, they're not as good as somebody else, or there's something wrong with them, or they're not living up to societal standards, and there's all those pressures. But I think it's important for us to know that, hey, look, at the end of the day, what makes you a good person, what makes you who you are, doesn't come from whether you have someone to post Instagram pictures with and little
Mhm.
cute stuff with. That doesn't make you who you are. What makes you who you are is the person on the inside, and what you do, how you care about people, how you help people, the unique traits about yourself that no one else has. That's what makes you who you are. And if that means being by yourself for a little bit, then that's okay. We don't have to constantly be with somebody in order to feel, validated. I keep bringing that word up because it's true, or
Mhm.
to feel like we're fitting in with society. It's totally okay to be alone sometimes. And not only that, Jody, I think it's really important to spend that time alone.
Mhm.
Because if you're constantly with another person, how are you ever going to find out truly about you and your interests and what you like, what you don't like, who you are? How are you going to figure those things out? And as painful as it is, as difficult as it is to be alone, and I get it, trust me, I've been there so many times, it is so essential, because when you're in that dark place, in that dark valley in life,
Mhm.
that's where you grow. Think about what a valley is in the scientific sense. It's a low piece of land between two higher pieces of land, right? So that means there's a
Yes.
lot of opportunity for water and growth. Same thing in our lives when we're in a valley, a lot of opportunity for growth. It's painful, it's dark, but we can find those hidden gems that are going to give us that strength and resiliency to keep moving on. And you only find that, though, when you're alone in that dark place. I think that's important to know.
Your best day ever, Scott.
My best day ever? Probably when I graduated college.
Okay, why?
Because it was at that moment that I finally felt like the chains were off me, that I could truly pursue what I wanted to do in my life. I could truly pursue on work, creating this brand and working to speak, to help people, and to really create this vision that I had and make it a reality, and not have to worry about pointless tests and projects on things that I wasn't really even that interested in. So for now, best day ever, graduating college, but I'm sure in a couple years that'll definitely change.
So moving forward, tell us about your brand. Tell us about your podcast, your workshops that I had mentioned. Tell us about them.
Yeah, so Scotty P Inspiration is a brand that I created almost about a year ago at this point. And my overall goal, like my slogan says and my podcast says, is to navigate life through the lens of hope. And I work with really anybody. I'll work with, conferences, adults, kids, millennials, whoever it is. I try to just want to be that everyday voice for that everyday person, to let someone know, hey, you know what? Life is hard. Let's acknowledge it, but let's also work on how we can move forward through that hardness and that difficulty and find those little pockets of peace in this moment today. And I do that through a variety of mediums. Social media, I'm very active with posting little inspirational videos.
Hmm.
I have my podcast, which I do once a week, which is The Lens of Hope. And then I also have a YouTube channel in which I post videos as well, just talking about everything from cognitive behavioral therapy practices to what do you do when this happens in your life, to just acknowledging that things are hard sometimes. And I do this in a way just so I can help people in the biggest way that I can. And I'm still, growing my brand. It just started recently, so I'm still trying to get more clients and more opportunities. So
It's
I'm always
phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
yeah, I appreciate it. And this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, because my passion is to help other people to get through those times, because I know that it's so hard. And if you don't have that right person to kind of guide you along, you can get lost. And I want to make sure that I help other people that went through the same experiences that I had in my life and let them know that there is hope, there is light, we can reach it. Here's how we're going to do it. And that's ultimately what I want to do.
So how do the older people, older than you, respond to you? Because you're a young person with so much wisdom, so much self-motivation and research and putting it all together. I mean, you're wow, way advanced as far as just being able to integrate it all and put together a very challenging field, if you will, motivating people, addressing depression, finding their path, coming out of the darkness into the light and having hope. So how do individuals older than you respond to you because you were young?
That's a wonderful question, Jody. And I found it to be a couple of different ways. It's either one, they're really impressed and just say like, this is
Mm-hmm.
amazing what you're doing, Scott, and they're very, complimentary. Or I get these people who look at me like, well, you're just a kid. I'm twice your age. What have you been through? You don't know anything about life. Come on, what could you possibly know about struggle? And I understand where those people are coming from.
Okay.
I get that, because there may be someone who's 40, 50 years old who's been struggling for a long time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you have this kid who's half your age telling you these things. I think it brings out people's insecurities and it makes them feel like, man, if this kid's 24 and saying this, I'm 50, what's wrong with me? And that's not what I want to do, because I want to help everybody, because I don't care about the age. I care about human beings and making sure that I help those souls on the inside get through that difficulty. But I think sometimes people will, almost kind of view it as if I'm trying to act like I'm better than them, or, oh, you're younger than me and you're going to tell me what to do, blah, 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 blah. And like I said, I understand that. But I think for the majority of
Mm-hmm.
people, they're really impressed with what the things I'm talking about, and they really connect with what I'm saying. Because all my presentations, everything I talk about is stuff that every single person on this earth at some point can relate to. And I would put
Yeah.
my hand to God saying that, because I don't talk about anything that's specifically only to Scott or only to men or only to
Mm-hmm.
women or only to old or young. I'm talking about stuff that goes on in between the ears up here that we all deal with. And, obviously you're going to have some people who aren't receptive to that, but
And
thankfully,
I think that's with all of us. And I think, again, emotion has no chronological age.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of the times when people say, well, what do you know? And I'm like, well, you're right. I don't know your life experience, but this is what I can offer. And then teach me. What do you suggest I do to better guide or help? But I think what you do, I think, affects everybody because it involves emotion and it's guidance. It's guidance. You're not telling people what to do. You're offering a way to get out of that dark area, to get out of that land of that purgatory, if you will, that nowhere's land kind of
Right.
thing. So I commend you. I commend you. And when I listen to you talk, I got to tell you, Scott, you're real. You're real. You're not putting on airs. You're not trying to, get on prime time. I mean, when you speak, you are speaking from your life experience, and you've earned the right. You've earned the
Thank
right. Regardless of chronological age, you've earned the right. Yes, do things change with us as we age? They do. I can look back yesteryear and I look back today, but a lot of those templates of emotion from the very start are still here and will be there at the end.
Absolutely. I love what you, well, first off, thank you for saying that. And that's my whole goal is like, I just want to be real. I think a lot of times in this business, I think of some of the people that I not look up to, but who are on like the mountaintop, who are making tons of money, who are nationally world renowned
Mhm.
known. I almost get the feeling that they're just doing it because they want to sell a new book or they want you to follow them on Instagram. And I never want to be that way. I want to create this new field of, hey, look, I am doing this because this is what I went through. I want to help you. I want to be real. I want to speak to the everyday person. And that's ultimately my goal. And that's the only way I know how to do it. So I'm thankful that you pointed that out, and it makes me
Well,
feel.
I'm feeling you, is what I'm saying is you're authentic, you're real. And those are the individuals on Inside America's Minds. They're people that really validate or have come from, beginnings and are where they are through earning that right, whatever that may be.
Right.
So I want to personally thank you for doing what you're doing. So tell us how people can reach you. Again, the Lens of Hope podcast. Go ahead and give us your website, and then I'm going to have you, if there was a message you want to leave to our audience, what might that be? But let's go ahead and start where people can get a hold of you.
Yeah, awesome. So the first thing we'll start with is my website. So if you go on www.scottypinspiration.com, and then on my website, you can see links to everything else that I do. And then from there, we'll go down the list. The next thing is Instagram. So my Instagram handle is at ScottyP_inspo. You can check me out on Instagram, see all the inspirational videos that I'm constantly posting up, new content, all things like that. Then also we have Facebook. And at Facebook, I am at Scotty P Inspiration. You can check me out on that. And then I got YouTube, and at YouTube, I am Scotty P Inspo. So that's Scotty P and then INSPO. And those are the
Okay.
best ways to get in contact with me. And then, of course, like I said at the end, I got my podcast, which can be viewed on all platforms. And that is the Lens of Hope podcast with Scott Prendergast. And those are the best ways to get in touch with me.
Thank you. I'm so technologically challenged that I don't have the little cues yet, that
No
people
worries.
are going to have to wait a long time for that one.
I
But
can't.
so thank you for letting our audience know. A message, Scott, a message that you would like to leave our audience.
A message to leave the audience. I will say this. I think that in life, a lot of times we hear about people are saying they're lost. I feel lost. I feel like I'm just not going anywhere. I don't know who I am, what I'm doing. But I want to kind of change your perspective on that. Lost is this overarching feeling, right? It's very generic. It's like an umbrella feeling. But let's dive a little bit deeper and look underneath that at those feelings and what are there. And that's where we're going to find those feelings of disappointment, stagnation, frustration. And it's those feelings that are morphing together to create that quote unquote lost overall feeling. And so I think what I want everyone to do in our lives is take a look at that overall feeling that's dominating your life, whether it's feeling lost, whether it's feeling inferior, whatever it is, and check out a little bit deeper underneath to see what those actual feelings are and learn to address those feelings and ask yourself the right questions on why you're feeling them. And then from there, that's going to lead us to the right answers. That's going to help us to move forward past those obstacles, whatever that might be. So that's a little message just to share with everyone as we wrap it up.
Thank you so much, Scott. Scott Prendergast, Lens of Hope. Wow, amazing. I hope we meet again. And I thank you. I thank you for the message you're sending and for being there for people, and especially for spreading the word hope. We have to have hope. Thank you so much, Scott. Take good care.
Absolutely, Jody. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Inside America's Minds. And I'm looking forward to connecting. I'll definitely be emailing you again. And just to thank you again for bringing me out here today. I really appreciate it, and all the kind things that you said. It's awesome the show you're doing. I'm so thankful for it.
It's my privilege. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.